Welcome, everybody, at the House of Destiny, you beautiful warriors of the new millennium. We have a very special conversations today, super, super special for us because we have such a special guest, an honored guest. And my mother Jane is here, of course, with me today. And we are going to have a conversation now with Roger Stone. So it is my honor to introduce to you my dear friend, Roger Stone. And thank you so much for joining us today. Mother and I have been waiting for a chance to speak to you, and we waited for just the right time. I think today is the right time. So how are you today, first of all?
Donna, thank you very much for having me. Jane, it's nice to see you again. We met, I think, in Myrtle Beach. And this is the right time. Yes. These are very turbulent times. These are times of great upheaval. Right. These are times in which we are really putting our faith in the Lord, and therefore I can't think of a more appropriate time to meet and speak like this.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? Something Mom and I really have been just itching to ask you about is how you got saved, because something happened in your life that changed things for you. And we really are interested in finding out what exactly did happen. I know our viewers are too.
Yes.
Well, I think it's important for people to understand a little background. I was baptized as a Roman Catholic. I had my first communion in the Catholic Church. I had my confirmation in the Catholic Church. I was married in the Catholic Church. But over time, I became a very successful American Republican political consultant. I joined a very influential firm in Washington, D.C., where I was a founder. And with that great success, candidly, I wandered far from the Lord. I lived the life of a libertine. I was a bit of a wild man. I didn't think I needed God. And through that period of time, I had the opportunity to work for four American presidents, starting with Richard Nixon through President Ronald Reagan, all the way to President Donald Trump. But then, as I think many of your viewers probably know, because of my 42-year relationship with Donald Trump, I was targeted by Robert Mueller in the Russian collusion witch hunt. Now, I want to be very clear. I didn't break any laws, nor did I do anything wrong. But I was put under the spotlight by Robert Mueller. And Mueller and his prosecutors went to several federal judges claiming that they had probable cause to charge me with treason, conspiracy against the United States, money laundering, counterfeiting, mail fraud, wire fraud, aiding and abetting felony, unauthorized access to government computer, numerous things which, of course, they had no evidence of because they didn't do any of those things. And ultimately, after getting over 1 million of my emails, looking at all my text messages and phone calls, the best they could do was to charge me with lying to Congress about Russian collusion, lying specifically about interactions with WikiLeaks, of which I actually had none. I never received anything from WikiLeaks and passed it on. The one contact I did have with them was completely benign. They essentially brushed me off. What I did do was to follow what Julian Assange was saying and writing online with a simple Google News search, and then repost a lot of it to my Twitter feed. That allowed them to frame me for lying about Russian collusion. But even then, I was so naive that I thought that I would be afforded a fair trial and that I would be given an opportunity to disprove this. How wrong I was. What I learned was that I was to be put through a Soviet-style show trial, that I would not be allowed to introduce any evidence proving that there was never any online hack of the Democratic National Committee, by the Russians or anyone else the underlying premise of the charges against me. And after I exhausted all of my money, essentially to pay for a legal defense, losing my home, my car, my savings, most of our insurance, my ability to make a living because the judge specifically gagged me and every member of my family and my attorneys and my supporters. In other words, under her ruling, no American was allowed to defend Roger Stone. Meanwhile, CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post were pounding on me as a traitor, as a Russian spy. I reached a point of desperation. I hit rock bottom. I was angry. I was frustrated. I was depressed. I was scared, not so much for myself, but for my 73-year-old wife, who's hard of hearing, otherwise at that point in excellent health. It was then that a number of pastors, priests, even rabbis, who I knew from my 40 years in American politics, all kept telling me repeatedly that I could find refuge in the Lord, that the only solution to spending life in prison and probably dying in prison was to turn the entire problem over to God. Still, I resisted that. I was reading the Proverbs, I was reading the Revelations, but I wasn't feeling it. And then I had the occasion to meet Reverend Franklin Graham in a chance meeting set up for me by Reverend Randy Coggins, who was a young evangelical pastor who I had befriended some years earlier. And it was really Reverend Graham who broke through with me. I was still thinking, like a political animal. So I said, well, Reverend Graham, you're a close friend of the president's. Maybe you could put in a good word for me in terms of presidential clemency. In other words, the commutation of an ultimate sentence, maybe even a pardon. Reverend Graham said, well, I'll see what I can do about that, but let me give you a much, much better piece of advice. You need to confess your sins and get right with the Lord. You need to pledge to walk in his way. And I absolutely guarantee you, if you will do that, you will do so with complete faith and complete sincerity, the Lord will lift you up and the Lord will save you from your persecutors. And still, in all honesty, I resisted. Ultimately, a few minutes later, I stood in a field at a revival in Boca Raton with about 2,000 other Christians. And the part of Reverend Graham's oration came where he said, I don't care if your problem is alcoholism or drug addiction or gambling addiction or health problems or family problems. If you put your faith in the Lord will lift you up. The Lord will deliver you. And at that moment, I felt the calling to stand up and pledge my allegiance to the Lord, confess my sins in front of 2,000 people. And I must tell you, it was like a cement block was being lifted from my shoulders. And I knew from that moment that as horrific as the trial would be, and it was a horrific experience, while those on the left and my critics were celebrating my impending doom and my ultimate death in prison, I knew that the Lord would give President Donald Trump the strength and the courage in an election year to save me from my persecutors and to recognize that the whole purpose that I had been charged was to pressure me into bearing false witness against him. In other words, they fabricated the charges against me. As I'm sure you recall, they raided my home at 6 o'clock in the morning. 29 heavily armed FBI agents in full SWAT gear. This was to scare the daylights out of me. That was in January. That July, they came back to me, to my lawyers, and said, your client's going to die in prison. Here's a list of 26 cell phone calls between he and candidate Trump in 2016. All he's got to do is admit, lie, that these were about Russian collusion and collaboration with WikiLeaks, and we'll argue with the judge for no jail time, which, of course, that in itself was a lie. They also said I wouldn't even have to testify against President Trump. I just needed to sign this declaration. Well, that was another lie. In other words, they wanted me to bear false witness against my friend of 42 years, President of the United States, and I refused to do that. It was in that period that people started contacting me by email, by text message, by letter. Sometimes people would just write a letter, Roger Stone, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, still would reach me. And I began hearing about an evangelical prophet by the name of Kim Clement. And I began to learn about his famous prophecy about the stone. It became overwhelming, the number of people contacting me about this. Therefore, I went online, I looked it up, and I want to be very clear. I'm not claiming in any way to be a savior or a prophet or anything other than a deeply flawed human being. But I know that throughout the Bible, the Lord has also often used broken people for his purposes. And therefore, I believe today that my life was spared for a greater purpose, that the Lord did save me because there's something else he wants me to do. I don't have all the answers. I admit that. In fact, right now, I'm probably more confounded than I've ever been. In other words, thinking and working as a strategist, I usually have a strategy to resolve every issue and every problem. I don't have that today. Here's what I do have. Complete and total faith in the Lord. The Lord is not going to let Satan win. The Lord is not going to stand by for the destruction of everything that he has created. And therefore, whatever it is that he has for me to do, consistent with Kim's prophecy, I'm prepared to do.
That's awesome. I remember the day that he said, the stone, remember that name. He said, remember. And I thought to myself, this is a bit of a strange word, because, you know, he didn't often name names. He's named very few.
Actually named people's names, right?
Very few people has he named. I mean, Donald Trump he'd named, and Clark, and then Stone. So this is very, very interesting. And it's interesting because it's all around this period of time where we're dealing with what happened to Donald Trump. Your name came up, Clay Clark's. It's all intertwined together, and here we are in the middle of what's playing out, and only God knows what's ultimately going to happen. But I think it really gives us some hope, something to hang on to, knowing that God knows beforehand what's going to be taking place.
And they shall say, what is your plan for this giant? And he will take a simple stone, remember the name, and he will hold it up, and they will laugh at him. But the plan is so brilliant, says the Lord, it could only have been given by me. Come on!
I think that the name does refer to you, because
yes,
it's pretty obvious. The name refers to you, because this whole thing with the Clark and the Trump and the Stone, it's all kind of connected. I mean, we are going through trials and tribulations. As Christians, we're going through trials and tribulations, especially now, because really what's happening in this country is they're trying to shut us Christians up.
Yeah.
They're trying to get rid of us. They don't want any of our moral values and our beliefs. They don't want that.
Along with the Constitution, they don't want it.
They don't want any of it. So we're definitely in a spiritual battle, and we are told that we're going to go through tribulation, and you've definitely had your share of tribulation. And I'm sure that there's a crown of righteousness waiting up in heaven for you. So although we go through these tribulations, I mean, there is a reward ultimately. There's a reward for those who persevere through tribulation.
And overcome.
Definitely. The overcomer gets the crown. He gets the reward. And that is what we're actually doing. We're in a state of sanctification where we are overcoming what comes against us, and we are saved. We are saved not by any of our works, but we are definitely in a period of sanctification, and that sanctification period of time, that's where we gain our crowns and our rewards from God.
Exactly. And also the fact that God said your name, and this is 2014, long before any of this was going to happen, also is an indication that, yes, you went through those trials, but the result of that attack, which I've never seen, I just want to say honestly, I didn't know you at the time, but I was watching what was going on, and I've never seen anything like it. It was shocking. The way that they would not allow your family to speak on the news. I saw people were coming up trying to speak, and nobody was allowed to speak. It was outrageous what they did to you, but the result of it was that God found you in that place, and that's the beauty of it. And he had said your name years before through my dad, who, when this all occurred, my dad is no longer even with us. And so this brings it all back to the fact that God is actually in control of this. And if we have the faith, but also the discernment and the wisdom. So these are the things we should be praying for, is that we can discern and that prophetically see. And I think that's why God is bringing that prophetic to the fore right now, because people, it's part of the fivefold ministry, and that's very complex. We don't have to go into that, but it's a necessary part. And God is calling for that element of the church, because we need to be able to see in a time where there's so many lies, so much deception and confusion, and where it appears the enemy is winning, that we know in our hearts a promise from God that we've already won this. Because Dad, when he prophesied that day, he said, you'll be humbled, and then some more, and then you will hear the sounds of great victory. And those are the things that we know as prophetic people. I'm holding on to that, and God, I'm going to remind you of what you promised me. In my darkest hour, I'm going to say, but you said victory to me, and I'm not letting go. And that goes back to the idea of where Jacob wrestled with God. And it's not that God doesn't want to do it or he's not going to. It's that he needs us to be a part of it. We can't just sit back and say, God's got this, so I'm not going to do anything. That's not what that means. And so it does become quite complex, but it's beautiful in how it plays out. And I think the way that God has worked in your life is beautiful to observe, especially someone like for us, because we heard your name and we didn't know who you were, and then we found out who you were, and we've watched what's happened to you.
Yes.
And God has done an incredible thing in your life, yes, for a purpose. Yes. You are not finished. But there's another thing I wanted to ask you about, if you're okay with talking about it, is that your wife was healed, Mrs. Stone. And
yeah,
I've prayed quite a bit for Mrs. Stone. God tells me to pray for her, so I'm interested to find out if you're okay with sharing that. What happened there?
Certainly. Look, I have experienced 5 miracles in my life in just 2 years. First, there is the miracle of the commutation of a long prison sentence. Then there is the miracle of an unconditional pardon. Shortly after my pardon, my wife was diagnosed with very aggressive stage 4 cancer. And the doctors did not hold up much hope for her survival. But today I'm happy to tell you through the healing power of Jesus Christ, my wife is cancer-free. She has survived. She's doing extraordinarily well. Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you for watching this clip on our YouTube channel. Unfortunately, the Kim Clement YouTube channel has suffered some censorship due to things that we said years ago and things that my dad prophesied also years ago. Unfortunately, because of the censorship, you can only see portions of our videos on YouTube. However, if you go to the link in the description, it will take you straight to our website, where you will be able to watch all of our broadcasts uncensored in their entirety. So I encourage you to go to the link in the description and you can watch more of what you've just seen. Thanks again for joining us, and don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell.